Hey guys, we're gonna be doing something kind of neat today. We're gonna be making a Pokédex using a Pokemon API. So this is what it's gonna look like. I have my screen a little zoomed in right here. And we are gonna be using an API that is free for everyone to use called the PokeAPI. This is the website for it right here. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys are familiar with it. It's pretty popular, especially when you're learning how to use APIs, third-party APIs on the internet. So let me just show you guys how the finished product of this finished app will look like. So right now the screen is not turned on the left side. On the right side, you see here is a list of all the Pokemons. We could click next to go to the next set of 20, and we could click any of these. So for example, let me click Bulbasaur, and we see Bulbasaur's information right here, like a Pokédex. We could click Squirtle and notice the color changes. The color of the background on the left side will change depending on the type of the Pokemon they have chosen. So if I go to Pikachu, which is a lightning electric type, it will turn yellow. And if I click Vulpix, for example, he's a fire type, so it will turn red. So this is what we're gonna be building today. Now, just to save some time, I'm gonna provide you all the CSS and all the HTML file that you need for this. I will post it in the links in the description below. I will also show in a bit how to get those codes for yourself to begin. What we're gonna do in this project, in this video, is we're just going to be focusing on the JavaScript. So this is what the finished JavaScript file looks like right here. It's not too long, and it should be pretty straightforward. What you're gonna be learning here is how to use the fetch API that JavaScript comes with built in. So this is what we're gonna be using. It's called the fetch function of JavaScript. And we are gonna be using the fetch in conjunction with this PokeAPI to build this right here. By the way, if you're curious, the whole styling of this page right here, you see, it's made only with HTML and CSS. So except the actual sprite files right here, everything else is all styled using HTML and CSS. So if you're curious about how I style this, take a copy of the style and the index HTML file that I will show you guys soon, and just take a look at how I stylize these. I use a lot of CSS grids, flexbox, and so on. So it might be an interesting case study too. Let me just show you an example. You see this D-pad right here. By the way, this D-pad doesn't really do anything, but I just had it there for aesthetics. But you can see here that I'm using a CSS grid here. So this might be a little fun to dive into later if you are interested in how I coded this. Okay, let me zoom back out to normal levels. By the way, if this is your first time in my channel, welcome. My name is Justin and I'm a professional full stack engineer based in Los Angeles. And I've decided to make a lot of these beginner friendly tutorials. And if you subscribe to my content, you'll see a lot of these type of projects that I'll be building with you guys. So if you guys like my content, please click the like button and subscribe to my content for more videos like this one. Okay, I adjusted my screen for a bit. I have my editor here. I personally like using WebStorm, but feel free to use any editor of your choice, whether it be VS Code or whatever. I just chose to use WebStorm. And I have created, before the video, I've created an empty folder right here. So I call the folder Pokédex. It doesn't matter what you call the folder. Just create an empty folder and open up that folder in your editor. And we're going to be making 3 files in here. The first file, I'm going to call index.html. And the next file, I'm going to call style.css. And finally, the last file is called app.js. So make sure you create these 3 files, and as I said before, let me just zoom in for each of these files a bit so that you guys can see. I'm gonna give you guys a link for the index, the HTML file, and the style.css file. So links should be in the description below. By the way, this is not hard. I made this as easy as possible. For example, let me just make this a little bigger. If you click on the description below for the link for the index.html, this is the page that you will get to. This is pretty much a GitHub gist. And what you can do to copy all this, you can either select it manually or click raw. And then you'll just give you a raw copy of that. Just select all, copy, and paste it to your index.html. So this is the index, the HTML file that we're going to be working with. We don't need to edit this because I did it all for you. And let's get the style sheet. So go back to my description, click on the link for the style.css, and this is what you should see. We're going to do the same thing. Click raw here, select all, and copy, and go to your style.css and paste that all in. Okay, so now we are done with the index and the style. So again, if you're curious how I set this up, you could check out the code right now. You could pause the video. But if you want to continue, I'm going to open up a preview, and this is what you should see. Let me just adjust my screen a bit. So this is what you should see. The style of this is all done. And what we have to do now is just add the code to our app.js file. This is where we're going to be spending majority of our time in. Okay, so for those who have never dealt with the third party, with the external API, if you have never touched the fetch function that's built into JavaScript before, what fetch does is it allows us to access data from a third-party source, whether it be PokeAPI or some cooking recipe API or whatever of your choice. Any API of your choice, you could use the fetch function that's built into JavaScript to grab those data. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Now, if this is your first time dealing with asynchronous JavaScript code or using an external API or whatnot, don't worry, I will lead you step by step. So we're going to start easy. Go to your app.js file and make sure this is all showing. And just to make sure the app.js file is connected to our rest of our code, our HTML and our style.css, I'm just going to console log here saying JS is connected. If this shows up in our terminal, let me open up our terminal. Yep, you see here, JS is connected. That means that this page is correctly configured to connect with app.js. If you don't see this message right here, it's either because you didn't click save here or you named your file something else other than app.js. Make sure you name as app.js. The reason why that is important is if you go to your index.html file, I have made the script tag look for the app.js file. So make sure your app.js file is named as such. So I'm going to assume that you see this JS is connected sign in your terminal. Now let me just close a couple of these. We don't need these just anymore. So let me close those. Okay, so now let's see how we can use the fetch function to, and let me close this. Let's see how we can use the fetch function to get data from this PokeAPI. So the link of this page will be in the link in the description below, but let's try using it. So in our JavaScript file, we don't need a console log anymore. I want to use the fetch function. So the first argument of the fetch function is the URL of the API URL that we want to fetch from. So I'm just gonna write it here. Do you see this part right here? Whoops. Let me do that. All right. So I'm just gonna write this right here. So let's fetch from. Make sure you write this correctly. HTTPS pokeapi.co/API/v2/Pokemon. And let's just get Bulbasaur. So I'm gonna grab the Pokemon of ID 1, and that should give you Bulbasaur right here. But let's see what the result of this result from fetch. Let's see what type of a shape this comes back as. So I'm gonna console log results from fetch, which is the output of the fetch function here. We're giving this string. So I'm gonna go back to my preview. This is not the right one. Let me just close. I'll just keep that for now. So that was my finished one. So ignore this one. You should see this right here. I'm gonna refresh the page. And if I look at my terminal here, my console, I see this promise. If you have never dealt with promises before, don't worry about it. It has to do with, it's how JavaScript handles asynchronous code. So what I mean by that is this fetching from this third-party data, it takes some time. JavaScript can't, it has to wait to get the data. Depending on your internet connection or whatnot, it might take some time. It takes time for your JavaScript file to get data from this API. So this is where asynchronous code comes to play. And that's what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna erase this const. I'm gonna make it back to this. The way that we could deal with asynchronous code is we could use the .then. So I'm gonna attach a .then to this and just put a space after that. It should look like this, but just to make it prettier, I'm gonna make it look like that. And inside this then, this will happen is once that the data from this URL you have finished receiving the data from this URL, then you will go into this then function right here, this then method. Inside should be a function. Usually the, what is it called? The parameter of this function that's inside, we call it the res, for short for response. And I'm just going to console log what that result is, what the response is. So again, this .then will occur after you have successfully gotten the data from this API right here. So I console logged right here, and you see this thing with the type, URL, redirected status code, headers, and body. Now, these are all interesting information, and later if you're working with a more complicated project, you might use some of these like the status code and such. But we're not interested in that in this project. We're just interested in what's usually in the body. But it's a readable string format. Now, this is a format that's not easy, that's not practical for us to use with. So what we typically do, this is pretty boilerplate for using the Fetch API. What we do is we do res.json. And this in turn, we attach another then to this. So this is another promise, and then we will receive that. And for this one, I will call the parameter not response, but how about data? And let's console log the data here. So again, why are we doing this? This response that we got from our first .then is not easy for us to work with this one. However, if we do res.json, let's see what that turns out to be. I get undefined right here, and it's because I actually got to return the result of this JSON function from this .then. So we should have return res.json. So let's see if that worked. Okay, now I have this whole JSON object right here, which looks very familiar, close to, as a matter of fact, identical to this data that we see in this website. So this is something that we could work with. Just to pretty up our code a little bit, notice this .then right here in our return function. We only have one statement, which is return res.json. So if you are dealing with something like this, what we can do is we could erase these curly braces and the return and just return right away like that. So that pretties up our code a little bit. Now, let's work with these data that we have just gotten. So again, this is from the second .then, and it's from our data parameter. So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna use JavaScript DOM manipulation to first grab the HTML tags that's associated. So pretty much if you look at my index.html, I have these places where I am awaiting data. So for example, we have the Pokey name. This is where the name of the Pokemon should go inside. The Pokey ID, this is where the ID should go. What else? The Pokemon front image and so on. So let's first grab these guys from our JavaScript so that we could work with them. So let me just open up this HTML file on the right side just for reference. And let's go back to our app.js file. And let's see which ones I need. So at the very top of my file, I'm going to have, by the way, this app.js file, I'm going to split it up into a couple sections. So the first section I want is the DOM objects. That's what I'm going to call this section. And pretty much we're going to get all the DOM objects that we need, the HTML tags, and we're just going to put it in a variable here. So the first one I want is the name. So I want to grab this span right here. I'm going to call this const Pokey name. And the standard in JavaScript is camel case, therefore I'm using camel case, but the standard in HTML is hyphen case, snake case. No, not snake case, it's called hyphen case, I believe. So that's why it looks a little different like that. But how do we grab this span right here? So the way that I'm gonna grab it is by doing document.querySelector. And this is a class, so I'm gonna put a dot here and then Pokey hyphen name, like so. Let me make this a little bigger. There we go. And just for now, let me just put a little bit more space so that you guys can see. So this, if I have written everything correctly, it should successfully grab this span right here. Let's just make sure that we did indeed grab the span, but let me console log what the result of this query selector is. So I'm gonna refresh the page and I see this span right here at the very top. So this is how we grab the HTML elements from our JavaScript. So let's grab all the ones that we need. We also need the Pokey ID. So I'm just gonna paste that in here. I'm gonna call that Pokey ID and query selector, the class Pokey ID. What else do we need? We need the front image and the back image. I'm gonna call the front image Pokey front image. Document query selector. So technically the front image and the back image are image tags, but it doesn't really matter because we have given them a unique class. And this one is Pokey front image. Make sure you write all these correctly. And Pokey back image. What else do we need? We need the Pokey type 1 and Pokey type 2. Pokey type 1. And Pokemon type 2. There we go. And I think we're almost done. We just need the weight and the height. Pokey weight. By the way, the reason why I'm prepending the word Pokey before all of these is because I don't want naming conflicts in the future. So dot Pokey weight. What I mean by that is later I might use a variable named weight. And I don't want that to conflict with our names here. Const Pokey height. Document. I don't know why I'm writing this, but whatever. Pokey height. Okay, so these are all the HTML DOM elements that we need for our JavaScript for the left side of this screen right here. So let's try putting this data that we got back from our fetch function. Remember, this is the data that we got back, right? So let's try to put the data that we got here to our HTML DOM elements here. So what do we need? The first thing we need is a name, right? So let me just put it below the console log actually. If you look at this JSON object that we got back, which is in this data parameter here, you can see that it has a name key right here. So how do we access this? We can just do data of the name key, like so. Now, what do we want to do with this? Let me just console log this to make sure that we got the correct name. We should see Bulbasaur because we're getting the first Pokemon, which is Bulbasaur. And you see Bulbasaur here. So what we want to do with this name is we want to put it into our Pokey name DOM object. So how we do that is we do Pokey name dot what was it? Text content. The inside of this tag should be data.name. Let's see if that let's see if that works. I refresh the page. I don't see anything here. Now, I forgot to do something. There's actually one other thing we have to do. Let's go to our HTML. And do you see this div, main screen? It has this hide class too. What this hide class does is it pretty much makes this div have a display of none, meaning it hides it. So and the reason why I want to do that is, let me show you why I did that. If we erase this hide, I refresh the page, you see this nasty thing right here, like all this empty state. I don't want to show that. So that's why initially I have added this hide, but because we don't want to hide it once we get data, what I want to do at the very beginning, let's first extract this DOM object into our constants right here. And the way that I'm going to do that is const main screen is document query selector. And I'm going to grab the main screen. By the way, if you erase this hide class here, make sure you put it back. And once we got the main screen, what I want to do is, once we got data, I want to get the main screen and remove the hide class. The way that we remove it is we access the class list property, and then we use remove and the name of the class that we want to remove, like so. So now, yeah, we should see this. Obviously, it looks very nasty right now, but at least we see the Bulbasaur name. Let's do that for the rest of the stuff that we need. So for example, PokeID text content is going to equal, where is the ID from? The ID is from the ID. So we're going to do data.id, like so. Now I see the ID here when I highlight. What else do we need? We also need, let's take care of the easy ones first. Let's take care of the weight and the height. So Pokey weight text content is going to be data of, what was it called? It is called weight. And likewise, the Pokey height text content is going to be from the height property. And you see the height and the weight here. Now, I don't really know what these numbers represents, but that's what they gave it to us. I don't know whether they're pounds or kilograms or whatnot, but whatever. We'll just display them like that. What else do we need? So let's take care of the little harder ones now. The first one I'm going to take care of is the types. Okay, so if you have played Pokemon, Pokemons could have a maximum of 2 types. It can't have 3 types. It can't have 4 types. It could only have either 1 type or 2 types. So we have to take care of both scenarios. A Pokemon that has 2 types and a Pokemon that only has 1 type. So Bulbasaur happens to have 2 types. So let's take care of that case first. This is what we're going to do. And by the way, every Pokemon always has at least 1 type. Now, this types is an array. So I'm going to extract that out to a variable here. What should I call that? How about this? Const data types. And I'm going to just extract the types property of this response, like so. So if I console log data types here, what should we see? We see an array with 2 objects inside. So the first type is in the 0th index and the second type is in the 1st index, but they are also objects. So what we're interested in is a name property within the type. So how do we access this one? It gets a little tricky. Let me fix my screen a bit. This is what we have to do. We extracted the data types from data.types just so that we don't write too much unnecessary code, repetitive code, I mean. And let's do this. The Pokey type 1 text content is going to equal the data types, the 0th index, which will give us our first type. And within that, we'll get back an object that has the slot property and the type property. So what we need after we get that is we need the type property after. And from the type property, we need the name. So hopefully you guys were able to follow along with me in that. Let's see if that worked. We don't need this console log anymore. I refresh the page and I do indeed see poison here. Now, remember what I said? The second type is optional. It may not exist. For Bulbasaur, if you looked at this object right here, you could see that it has 2 types, like so. Our second type is grass. But if we went to maybe Pokemon Index 4, which is Charmander, I believe, yeah. if we look at the result of this, if you look at the types, there's only one, right? There's only one object here, which is fire. So we have to take care of that scenario. So this is what I am going to do. What should I do actually? Let's do this. I'm going to extract the two types. Const data first type. I'm just going to get it from data types at 0, and const data second type, which may or may not exist, like so. And just to clean up my code, let me just reference data first type here. There we go. That looks a little better. Okay, so we will do this. We will check if the data second type exists or not. So if data second type, if it doesn't exist, this if condition will be false. So then we will do something. But if it exists, this will become true. If this is an object, then this will become true. So we will go inside this if condition. If that is true, what we want to do is Pokey type 2 text content is going to be data second type, type property, and the name property after that. Else, what do we want to do? So if it doesn't have a second type, what I want to do is I want to grab the Pokey type 2 HTML DOM element from up here, and I still want to update the text content, but except this time to an empty string. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is later, I'm going to have buttons on the right side where we could click different Pokemons, and this data on the left side will be updated, right? But if we don't empty out the string of the Pokey type 2, then we will see the old second Pokemon type from our old Pokemon. And we don't want that. We want to empty it out. So I refresh the page. I still see fire here. I see nothing in this bottom one. And if I go back to my Pokemon 1 by updating my fetch URL to back to 1, I see both poison and grass. All right, so that is good. However, one thing that bothers me is if I go back to Charmander, which only has one type, I still see this circle, which is very annoying, right? So for the second type, because the second type doesn't exist, all we see is a CSS styling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. If data second type exists, then what I'm going to do is, actually, let me do the else part first. If it doesn't exist, I am going to get my Pokey type 2 DOM element, Pokey type 2. I'm going to add a class to it. Do you remember the hide class that I had that we were messing with before for the main screen? We could also add the hide class to our Pokey type 2. And let's see what that does. Then the second one goes away. Do you see we don't see the circle here anymore, right? However, if it does have a second type, then we got to remove the hide class. Like so. So again, Charmander, we don't see it. But if we go back to Bulbasaur, then we see both. Now, you might be asking, oh, but what if we clicked, for example, we went to Charmander, so we added the hide class to our second type. And what if we went to maybe Carmeleon, which is also one type? Are we gonna remove are we gonna remove a class that doesn't exist? Or rather, maybe that's not the correct word. This is probably what I meant. Let's go to Bulbasaur, which has two types. So we remove the hide type in the beginning. And now what if we go to do the Ivysaur, which also has a second type? How can we remove a class that didn't exist? So if we try to remove a class that doesn't exist, HTML doesn't care. He will just ignore it and go on with his life. So we don't care about that. So this will work. Okay, so now let's deal with the images. Let's see how the images are structured in our data response. And I see that this sprite property here, and we see a bunch of sprites. What I'm interested in is the front default and the back default. So let's do that now. Let's grab our Pokey front image DOM element. And I want to, except this time it's a little different. Let me show you guys our HTML file here. We have, where is it? our Pokey front image DOM element and our Pokey back image DOM element, they are actually image tags, and we don't want to update the text content for these. We want to update the source, which is the URL of the image. So that's what we are going to do here. How we update the source is this. We do Pokey front image source is equal to whatever. So we want, for the front image, we want the, what was it? The data, right? Data dot, let me make this smaller again. Data dot, no, not that. I want to use the property sprites, and I want the front default, like so. I am updating the source to this URL here. Now, I have noticed that in some of the later Pokemons, it always has a front image, but it may not always have a back image. Let me just do it for the back image first and I'll explain. Pokey back image, whoops, it's gonna be not front default, but back default. Now, in case these don't exist, then it will become null, but I don't wanna set the source to null. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a short circuit operator and say, and do this, put an OR operator here and put an empty string. So if for whatever reason, this front default or back default was null, we would put an empty string into our source instead. So this is kind of like a safeguard just in case. Now let's see if that worked. And it did. Okay, so we are at least almost done with displaying all the content from the left side, except one minor thing. Not a minor, a major thing. We want to update the background color of this based depending on what type they are. So if they were grass, it should be green. If they're fire, they should be red. So how are we going to do that? The way that we are going to do that is this. Let me go back to my style.css. At the very bottom of this file, you should see classes for all the types: normal, fighting, flying, poison, ground, rock, bug, and so on. Let me just expand this all the way. And what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to reference these, I'm going to put the style.css on the right side. Okay, so let me zoom in. We have all these types, and what we have to do is to our main screen div right here, we're going to add a class depending on what the first type of our result is. We're going to add that class name to that div right there. So what I mean by that is this. Let me show you guys. We already have reference to the main screen DOM object here because we want to remove the high class. But at the very beginning of all this .then result here, this is what I want us to do. I need reference to this first type, and that's what I'm gonna add. So again, in my Bulbasaur that was poison, although technically I wish grass was first, but whatever. But I'm gonna grab this first type, and I'm gonna add that name, the poison, to our class of main screen. So let's do this. Let's just grab all of our type logic, which is these couple lines right here, and I want to put them in the very top, like so, right below our console.log, which we will remove later. And the reason why I want that is after we have taken care of the type logic, I want to reference this data first type, or rather this right here, which gives us the name of the type. And I want to do this. Main screen class list, add the result of that, like so. Now, let me just put a space here. Let's see what happens then. I refresh the page and now it turns purple. The reason why it turned purple again is Ivysaur's first type is poison, and it used the CSS file, looked for the poison class. Where is it? I can't find it. Oh, here it is. And it gives the background color of this. So if we, for example, go to Charmander, we will now get red. All right, so we have a couple problems though. Remember what I said before. What are we doing once we found the type? Once we click on a Pokemon, we're going to give it a class to that div, right? However, the issue is if we decide later to click on a different Pokemon, we're going to add another type, another class to that div without removing the old class. So every single time we click, we have to make sure we remove any of the existing class that was existing within our main screen DOM element. So there's no easy way to do this, but what we have to do is we just have to make sure we remove every single one because we don't know what type existed before we clicked. So we can't do like an if condition, or we can't dynamically just choose that type and remove it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually write code that removes all of this type. So what I mean by that is before we do any logic here, this is what I want us to do. Main screen class list dot remove, and referencing our style.css file, I'm going to remove every single class like this. Remove the normal class if it existed. Remove the fighting if it existed, and so on. Now, there's like 18 types total, I think. I don't want to write every single one here, and that's a lot of repeated code. So I am going to make a util function that deals with this. So let me erase this. Right below, let me just full screen this. Right below our DOM objects, I'm going to have a function section here. And I'm going to have a function called const reset screen. How about that? And I'm going to put these guys in here. And instead, within this fetch, I'm going to invoke the reset screen function like so. This is, by the way, an ES6 arrow function. And we could technically list out every single type like this and write it. Or you could do something like this. I'm going to have another section here called constants and variables that we're going to be using for this project. And I'm just going to put all these types in an array. So, and make sure you write these very carefully. Don't make many typos. I'm going to call this will be a constant. I'm going to call this types, capital, because these won't change. I'm going to put some space here just to pretty it. And I'm just going to write 3 types for each row. So normal, fighting, fly, poison, ground, rock, bug, ghost, steel, fire, water, grass. You know, I never knew how many types existed in Pokemon. Grass, electric, psychic, ice, dragon, dark, fairy, and I think that is it. Yes, that is it. Okay, so instead of doing this main class list remove normal fighting, right? Instead of doing this 18 times, what we could do is we could loop through our types constant, our array, I mean, and I'm going to say const type of types. I'm going to do a for of loop. So if I do this, let me just show you guys. Let me console log what this type is. And we are calling this function here, so we should see something in our terminal. You see here, we have console logged all the types. So we loop through each element in this array, and we could do whatever we want in this for of loop. So what we want to do is, we want to, where was it? Get the main screen DOM element, and we want to get the class list, but remove the type class, like so. That way we don't have to write 18 lines of code, we just have these 3 lines, and we have removed every single type, if they existed. And because this is called the reset screen function, And because we have decided to put, where was it? This, we remove the high class from it. Why don't we just put that in the function too? I'm going to cut that out. And I am going to put that at the very top, like so. Make sure you don't put it in the for loop, because then that's just redundant. You don't want to be removing this all 18 times. So just put it in the very beginning. And let's make sure everything still works. I'm going to refresh the page and I still see Charmander. All right, it still doesn't look ideal. I want to add a little bit more styling to this to make it a little prettier. So what I want to do is, first of all, notice this Charmander and the fire is not capitalized, right? I want the first letter to be capitalized, I mean. So what I want to do is I want to make a new function, which I will put under the function section right here of our JavaScript file. And I will just call this const capitalize. So this is a function that gets a string, and what I'm going to do is I just want to capitalize the first character of the string by doing 2 uppercase like so, and we're going to append that to the rest of the string. So I'm going to do substring, and starting from the first index, go to the very end. To let JavaScript know that we want to go to the very end is we just don't give a second parameter like so. And let's make use of this by going, and we don't need this console log anymore. So let's erase that within our dot then. Where do we want that? We want to capitalize the name, right? So I'm gonna encapsulate the name into this capitalize function. It doesn't seem to work because I actually put it in the wrong place. It is capitalizing the fire. I put it in the fire in the type place. So I still did want to capitalize that, so I'll leave that be. Let's capitalize our second data type as well, which we can't see, so I'm going to make this back to Bulbasaur, and we have capitalized both of them. And let's capitalize, make sure you don't capitalize the class list adding, because CSS is case sensitive, so we want that to remain lowercase. However, we do want to capitalize the data of name. Like so. All right, so now Bulbasaur is capitalized. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like just this being a 1 right here. What I like is putting a hashtag in front of it, like so. But I still don't like this either, because I don't think there's any Pokemons over that's 4 digits. So it's at most 3 digits for now. So I want to left pad this 1 with zeros if it is less than 100. So what I mean by that is, let's first convert this. Right now, this 1, the result of this data is a number. Let's first convert that to a string. Now, the reason why I want to convert that to this number to a string is because I want to use one of the string methods, which is left pad. Or was it pad left? I'm pretty sure it was left pad. Let me just Google it just to make sure. String left pad, JavaScript. Oh, it's called pad start. I see. So this is what we want to do, is we want to use the pad start, and our first argument we give is the length of this string. So we want it to be 3 characters. And what we want to pad it with, if it isn't 3 characters, is the number 0, like so. Now let's see what we get. Yeah, so this is what we see. I'm going to close that window, and that is better. So if we went to, for example, like Pokemon 100, then we won't pad anything, like you see here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, I think. Let me go back to Bulbasaur. I see that the weight and the height is not capitalized. You could, if that is bugging you, you could go back to our HTML file and manually capitalize these, but I'll just leave it lowercase. And I think with the left section, we are all done. So let's move on and get data, the Pokemon list for our right side right here. So I'm going to go back to the PokeAPI. And before we go on, let's put a comment on this first fetch. The only fetch that we have is get data for left side of screen. How about that? because we're gonna have get data for right side of screen. And the way that we're gonna grab the Pokemon list for the right side is using going to just Pokemon instead of giving an ID to it. So we're gonna get this fetch. It's gonna look very similar, except instead of giving a manual ID, we're just gonna go to the Pokemon, like so. And just like before, we're gonna have a dot then, get the response, make that to a JSON, and dot then data, and let's console log this data right here to see what we are working with. Go back to our Pokey index, and we see that we get a count, a next property, a previous property, which happens to be null, and our result, which only gives us the first 20 Pokemon. So the reason why it only gave us the first 20 Pokemon is by default, this parameter right here has a couple property query parameters associated with it. So I want us to manually give query parameters to it. So we're going to give an offset of 0 and limit of 20. I want to limit the result of our Pokemon list to just 20 because we could only fit 20 Pokemons in this screen right here. By the way, just to show you guys, if I put limit 50 here, I will get back a result of 50 items. So this limit dictates how many Pokemons we get within our results. Now, what this offset does is notice our results start from Bulbasaur, right? Which is ID 1. This offset, for example, if you put 50 here, we will start from the 51st Pokemon, which is the trio that you see here. So that's what this offset parameter does and what the limit parameter does. However, we just want to limit our result to 20. And why don't we just start from the offset of 0 for now? So I'm going to grab this string right here, the parameters, and manually place them right here. And let's console log the data. We console log the data and we still see the results here. So what I'm interested in is the result array for now. So what we are going to do is I'm going to grab them and place them in a variable called results data, and we are interested in the results property. So let me console log the results and we should see the array, which we do right here. Now I'm going to show you guys a little neat ESX shortcut for this. Notice the property name and the variable name that we decide to use is the same. So we could use this ESX thing called the destructuring, and we're pretty much going to destructure this property from our data object like so. So this is essentially the same thing. Whenever you have an object and you want to destructure its properties to a variable, this is what you can do. So let me refresh the page and I still get back the same array. So I think this is a little neater, so we're going to make use out of that. Now, what do we want to do? We want to put each of these guys somehow into each of our DOM elements here. We have 20 DOM elements here that we could put. We want to put each of them here. But before we do that, let's first grab our DOM element. So let me go back to my index.html and notice we have 20 here of this class called list item. So let me just copy the list item class name, go back to our DOM object section. And what I want us to grab is the list items. So I'm going to call this const Pokey list items. Document, I don't want to use query selector like before here. Instead, I want to use query selector all because there is more than one and I want to grab every single one like so. Let me console log Pokey list item to see what the shape of this is like. And at the very top, I see a node list array-like object with the 20 nodes. Okay, so that's what we're gonna be dealing with. So let's make use of that. What I want us to do is, I want us to loop through our DOM elements, this array here, Pokey list items. Const Pokey list item of Pokey list items. This is a typical for of loop, except I don't want to use a for of loop this time because I want access to the index that we're in. So I'm going to use a traditional for loop. We're going to do let I is equal to 0. I is going to go from the length of this Pokey list items.length. And again, the reason why I'm doing a typical for loop is I need the index. So let's extract out the current DOM element from our array. So const Pokey list item is Pokey list items at not the 0th index, but the ith index of our iteration. And I also want access to the result data at that index. So I'm going to put that in another variable called result data, and we're gonna just grab the ith index from that. Now, why did I decide to loop through my Pokey list items instead of my results? Because results is also an array, right? Too, right? So we could have technically looped through the results as well. But the reason why I'm looping through the Pokey list items is for whatever reason, the results may not always have 20 elements. So for example, what if our offset was like 100 or what? No, like 900. So that the last few Pokemons that were left, there was only like 10 of them or 11 of them. Then our results would have a length of 11. So it may not always give us 20 results, but the Pokey list items will always have 20 elements because we have manually placed 20, or I have placed 20 list items here. That is why I am looping through the Pokey list items instead of the results, because I know that we will always loop through this 20 times. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Let me just, this is what we want to do. If the result data exists, meaning the result has the current index, then we want to do something, else we want to do something else. So what do we want to do here? This is what we want to do. Each result, notice, is an object that has a name property and a URL property. What we are interested in is not only the name, but we need the Pokemon index number, the ID. But that ID is embedded in the URL at the very end. Hopefully you see this right here. Sorry, I don't know how to zoom. I guess I could zoom in here, but no. So hopefully you guys see this at the very end. This has the ID, but this is what we're interested in. So, well, before I do that, actually, let me explain why I need that. Let's just extract out using ES6 notation, destructure the name property from our result data. And within here, let's update our Pokey list item, which is the HTML DOM element that we have got from our Pokey list items array. We have got the specific DOM element in question, and we want to update its text content to the name. Let's see what happens then. Else, if we didn't find the result for that index, we just want to make this into an empty string, like so. So notice what we have here. First of all, let's capitalize it. I'm going to use our handy capitalize function again and capitalize the name, like so. Yeah. But notice I want numbers associated on the left side. I want it to say like 1 is Bulbasaur, 2 is Ivysaur, and so on. And that's why we got to somehow get it from our URL of our results. So let's also destructure the URL of our result data. And this is what I'm going to do. Oh, by the way, technically we can't destructure it out here, because if result data was undefined or null, then this will error out because we can't destructure the name property and the URL property of something that is null or undefined. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the destructuring in here. If result data, meaning if result data exists, then we know we can destructure it because it will have these properties. Now, the way that I'm going to grab the Pokemon number is a little bit complicated. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make an array called URL array, and I'm going to invoke the split method of the URL string, and I'm going to split it with the delimiter of this slash. So what that will do is it will separate every single time there's a slash in our URL, it will split it into different elements of the array. So let's console log this URL array and see what we're dealing with. You see this? It's an array with all these nonsense right here. Now the last element is an empty string, and that's the reason why is because if you look at our URL, it ends with a slash. So it will use that, it will separate that and just put an empty element at the very end. But what we're interested in is the second last element, which will give us the index. So after we have split our URL array, I want the index, the ID. And the ID is going to be the second last element of our URL array. So the way that I'm going to grab the second last element is URL array.length. Typically, if you want to grab the last one, you do -1, but because we want the second last one, we want to do -2 because the last one is just an empty string. We want the second last one. So not only do we want to put the name, capitalized name in our text content of our Poke list item, we want to also put ID and even this dot like this to separate the ID with the name, like so. Now that looks a little better in my opinion. And if we were to go to offset of 20 to see the next 20, I updated the URL string here. We see it starts from Sparrow 21, Pharaoh 23, and so on. So that is working. Let me just update this back to 0. All right, so that is working. Obviously, these buttons don't work. They don't update this content right here. However, how about now we make it so that these buttons work too? So that if I click next here, it will go to the next 20 set. Let's do that now. As always, we have to grab these DOM elements and put them in a variable at the very top. I will call the left one left button. And what class did I use? I used the left button class. Document query selector, not all, but query selector this time because we only want one. And dot left button. The dots is telling the query selector that we want a class of name left button. And we also want the right button. Whoops, make sure you spell it correctly. Okay, so now what do we want to do? We want to add event listeners to these DOM elements right here. We want to be listening in to a click event so that whenever a user clicks here, we want to fire a function. So the way that we do that is we add event listeners. So I'm going to add a final section here called event, adding event listeners, like so. So let's get our left button and our right button and add event listeners to them. And the event that I'm looking for is called the click event. And the second argument here is the function that we want to fire once someone clicks on the left button or the right button. But I want us to do something fancy here. I want to extract those out into its own function. So usually what you could do is like put like an arrow function here, but we want to extract that out to another function. And this is what I am going to do. I'm going to ignore the left button for now, comment that out, and just work with the right button first. And within our functions section, I'm going to add a function here called const handle. How about right button click? Like that. And make that an arrow function like so. And put handle right button click here. What's very important is you don't call the function by putting parentheses here. What we want to do as a second argument is pass the function as a reference. So only the name of the function. So make sure you don't put parentheses here. Otherwise you're calling it instead of passing the function as a reference. So let's see if this works. By the way, this has a parameter, which we typically call E. Let me console log what the E is. Here's a little preview. We're not actually going to use this E, but I just want to show you guys that this has an E. All event handlers will give you this E. So if I click this now, nothing happens. And why is nothing happening? It's because add event listener is an unresolved function or method. Why is that? Document query selector left button. It's because I spelled this wrong, didn't I? Yeah, it's add event listener. Sorry about that. And this console log is from our previous thing, which is up here. I don't want that to pollute our console. So let's get rid of that. You don't see anything here, but if I click, now we see the mouse event that we console logged in our function of this handle right button click. And this is what we want. So let me show you guys what happens if I call this function here. So I get this undefined. And when I click it, nothing happens because we immediately invoke the function when we put parentheses. Therefore, we don't want to put the parentheses and leave it like that. So that when we click it, the function fires like so. Now, again, we're not going to make use of this E, so I'm going to just get rid of that in the parameters like so. Okay, so what we want to do is when we click this, we want to do a couple things. So let's see, what's the best way to explain this? I want to grab the next offset of our fetch. So let's do this. Going back to my PokeAPI, let's put an offset of 20 here and limit of 20 and see what our data looks like. Do you see here? We get a next property and a previous property, which gives you the URL for the next set of 20 and the previous set of 20. And we are gonna make use out of this now. So let's do this. What is the best way to handle this? Within our constants and variables section of our JavaScript file, I'm gonna put a previous URL, prev URL string, and maybe we'll put it as empty string now for now, and a next URL string. And by the way, we're gonna be updating these so that let's use let instead of const. And whenever we fetch a Pokemon list, we're gonna update these strings to this previous and next property that we see in our result. Now, if the previous or next doesn't exist for whatever reason, for example, if offset was 0, we can't get the previous set of that. So the previous link is null. So why don't we follow their pattern and initialize these as null as well, like so. Now, whenever we fetch a data, not this one, but this one for the right side of the screen. Whenever we fetch data, I want us to update our previous URL and our next URL that we have defined up here. So remember that is in the previous key and the next key of our data. So why don't we destructure those as well? Previous and next. And we are going to manually update our prev URL string to the previous, which may be null, and next URL string to next, like so. And now, whenever we click this button, we want it to grab the next URL for the right button, where was it? This one, and fetch it with that URL instead. And do the same logic here. So because we're going to be doing this a lot, why don't we put this into a function? I'm going to cut that out, getting the Pokemon list, make a function up here. So I'm going to call this const fetch. How about Poke list? Fetch the Poke list. Make an arrow function like so, and just paste the fetch inside. Except I want this to take in arguments. So, and maybe we should put this before our handle right button click. So I'm going to cut out the handle right button click and put it down here because we're going to be calling this function here. Except we're going to be passing a URL as a parameter like so. And instead of fetching from this URL, I'm going to cut this and fetch from the URL that we pass in the parameter so that when we click the handle right button click, if the next URL exists, because it might be null. Null is a false value, falsy value, I mean. So if next URL exists, if that is truthy, and what else? I think that's it for now. If next URL is truthy, then we want to do something, right? We want to fetch Pokey list from the next URL, like so. Now, right now is empty. And the reason why this next button is not working is because this was null and we never updated this value. So I'm going to add a final section called initialize app. And what I'm going to do is I am going to call our fetch Pokey list function, fetch Pokey list with the string, which I will manually type in here. I've cut the string before, remember, and I'm going to put this string. So at the very beginning, I'm going to make sure that the app calls get the Pokemon list of the first 20 Pokemon. Now, if we refresh, we see the Pokey list. If I click next here, I get the next set of 20 and the next set of 20 and so on. And that will only occur if the next URL exists. And every single time we click this, we are updating the next URL and the previous URL as well. Now let's take care of the left button. This one right here, which we will call handle left button click. And we will put it up here. Const handle left button click. Don't need any arguments. And this one, if previous URL exists, then we want to fetch Pokey list from the previous URL. Now let's see if that works. I refresh the page. I have nothing here. Why is that? Left button, add event. I called it an event lister again. I don't know why I keep on doing that. Sorry about that. Let's spell that correctly. I get a list here. I click previous now, nothing happens. And the reason why is because previous URL is null, so it does nothing. Remember, we only want to do something, fetch something, if that previous URL exists. Otherwise, don't do anything. So this is good. This is what we want. However, if we click next now, we go to the next 20. If we click previous from here, we go back to the first 20. So this is working as intended. Now, initially when I coded this on my own, I combined these two functions into one. However, I felt like that just unnecessarily complicated things, so I will just leave it as two separate functions like so. What else do we want? Now what I want us to do is our final task is make sure these buttons work. When we click these, I want us to do something, update the menu on the left side here. So that's what we are going to do now. But we have the Pokey list items. We have access to them here. What we gotta do is we have to loop through all 20 of them and manually add event listeners to each one. So that's what we're gonna do here. Adding event listeners. Well, let's do a for of loop. Const, what do we call that? Pokey list item of Pokey list items. Loop through each item, and we want to add event listeners to every single one. Make sure I spell event listener correctly this time. Add a click event, and we are gonna do handle list item click. How about that? Make that function up here. Const handle list item click, and I do want the E event this time. So let's just console log what that E is, and to make sure that it is indeed connected, our event listeners is connected. So we should see something in our console when we click somewhere here, and we see a mouse event. What I'm interested in specifically is the E.target. Now, the reason why I'm interested in this is because we have to know which Pokemon that we have clicked. And the only way we will know which Pokemon we have clicked is this number right here. We want to make use of this number that we see on the left side, the 6 or the 4 of Charmander and so on. So we need this e.target. So this is what I'm going to do, just to make sure that e.target exists, because it might be undefined for whatever reason, like maybe our app broke or something. By the way, one thing we're not doing in this project is dealing with errors. So for example, what if we couldn't get a successful network request? What if we didn't get a response from our fetching from the PokeAPI? Maybe the PokeAPI was down. We're not going to be dealing with that. We're going to assume that this will always give us back a response, because I don't want to make this video too complicated, so we won't deal with error handlings, like showing an error state or whatever. So where was I? I kind of lost my train of thought. Okay, so if e.target does not exist, if it does not exist, I just want to return, meaning don't do anything. Now, if it does exist, let's put that in a variable. We'll call it the list item of e.target, which is these guys right here. Now, what we are interested in is the content. So let's also do this. If the content, the text content was an empty string, maybe we went to the last set of 13, so the last 7 was empty, right? Then those will be an empty string. So if list text content is an empty string, an empty string is a falsy value. So if you put a negation operator here, this will become true. So if that is empty, we also don't want to do anything. Now, if we are down here, we are assuming that the text content exists. So if it exists, we want to somehow grab this number from here. Let's console log, first of all, what list item text content is. I click Venusaur and I see 3 is a string, 3.Venusaur. What I'm interested in is the ID here. The way that I'm going to grab the ID is this. I'm going to do something similar to what we did to grab the IDs to write them here. I'm going to do const text array is going to be list item text content split it at the dot that we have put. And what I'm interested in is the index, right? So the ID. So why don't we just grab the ID right away, like so. And let me just console log the ID just to make sure we got the correct ID. I see 7 for Squirtle, 15 for Beedrill, and so on. So that is working as intended. And now, do you remember us doing this? Getting the data for the left side of the screen? Let's put that in a function as well, which I will put up here. Fetch, I will call this const fetch Pokemon data. How about Poke data? Const fetch Poke data, and we're gonna pass in the ID of the Pokemon here. And what I'm gonna do is cut this whole big fetch here, erase this comment, and put it in here, fetch Poke data. Except this time, we don't want to manually go to the first Pokemon. I want to make this an ESX string interpolation by putting backticks. And the ID that I will pass, I'm going to put it here, like so. Everything else, I think it is good. So from our, where were we? From our, once we got the ID, we're going to fetch Poke data. Call that function with the ID that we have gotten, like so. I refresh the page. Now we see nothing. I think this is good. Initially, I don't want to show them anything. So we're going to turn off the screen. But when we click something now, we see Squirtle, we see Beedrill, we go next, I see Arcanine, Mankey, and so on. So I think we are nearing completion. If not, we are done already. Let's see, do I have any console logs anywhere? No, I don't. So I think we are done. Our line of JavaScript turned out to be 125, 124. So that is a pretty good, not too long, not too short. We have separated our JavaScript file into different sections. Here is our DOM elements where we grab the DOM elements from our HTML. Here are the constants and variables that we are using for this app. Here are the functions that we have. And we have the event listeners that we have added to the buttons that we need. And we have initialized the app by getting some data for the right side here. Okay, so I think we are done. Hey guys, so hopefully you guys like this project. I had a pretty fun time designing this element, so I hope you guys like this too. And in case you guys stuck somewhere, I have posted a link of my GitHub repo. I made a repo for this, and the link's in the description below. So if you go to that link, you'll see this page right here. And what you can do is, if you're not comfortable with GitHub, just maybe go to the app.js file, and you could see my code right here. So if you had a typo or somewhere, you could just copy this and paste it to your code and see if that works. But pretty much all my code is here. And guys, I have made this open source. Feel free to use this in your personal portfolios and projects and whatnot. But I encourage you guys to maybe update the UI. You could add new features, maybe show more descriptions in here. Everything's up to you. Maybe you could even make these diagonals left or right or B or A button work. I don't know what they will be used for, but whatever. It could be a fun exercise. So guys, hopefully you guys like this. Guys, again, if you guys like my content, please click like below. That will help a lot. And also subscribe to my content for more content like this. I'll be releasing fairly maybe 2 or 3 times a week of these personal projects that you guys can work on as well. And these will be aimed for beginners. I also have intermediate and advanced section. Specifically, I have a lot of React content as well. So if you are comfortable with React, then stay tuned for future React content as well. So guys, hopefully you guys are still staying safe, staying quarantined, and I will see you guys next time.